Hi, thanks for checking out another video on my channel. This one is, although it's included in the series about us getting llamas, it's mainly about how I make gates. I've made quite a few gates on the dairy farm that I work on, and I've learned a few things to get the gate to sit right, to be the right size, and to look right, and to swing right on the hinges. And this is a few things that I've taught myself, so hopefully you'll learn a little bit from this, and if you've tuned in to see how to make gates, I hope you learn something and enjoy it. So I'm about to make the two gates that I need to make. That one's got to go between two posts that are 1035 millimeters apart, and her indoors wants them 1150 high. So the first thing you do is you make your first mark at 1150. Now it will end up the thickness of the pipe higher than 1150, but you can always cut a little bit off the end. It's a real pisser when you bend a piece of pipe and you've underestimated or miscalculated where the bend's going to be, and you need to add 20 mil to it, because I've done that. You know, everybody's done it. It's just a pisser and it's messy. And whenever I bend pipe, I bend it with the seam on the inside, as I find that the walls don't tend to collapse then. In order to get the bends at 90 degrees, what I do is I'll find something fairly large that's got a factory 90 degree edge, and I'll just chalk out myself a 90 degree on the floor. I find that works pretty well. And if you overbend it or underbend it, actually if you overbend it, you can always usually flex it back by wedging it in something heavy and just heaving back on it. So that's how I get them to 90 degrees. And what I normally do is I do a couple, do one there, and then there's one over here, just so that if I'm working on a long gate, I don't have to keep dragging it back and forth. I've got a 90 degree I can drag the pipe bender to, which is fairly close to where I'm working. So let's bend that pipe now, and we'll see how that goes. So what I do is I start off the bend like this, making sure that my mark is in the middle of the mandrel, the actual mandrel itself. And then you get to a point where it's easier just to lay it down. And this one's actually got stops there and there, which are the same height from this base as the base here, so it lies flat. That thin wall stuff collapsed, so I've used thicker wall stuff, and I've moved the rollers out one space from there to there, which should increase the bend radius a wee bit, and hopefully this one won't collapse. I'm not sure what happened with that other one, to be honest. Sometimes it just happens. Different batch of pipe or whatever. One good idea is to try and keep the whole thing flat, and by that I mean try and keep that pipe that you're bending on the same plane. So what I've done is I've put a block of wood down there, which is within a few millimeters of the height of where it's sitting in the center of those rollers, and I'll put a nail in that block of wood, and have a watch what happens when I'm cranking it, because it's bending the pipe, so that'll want to travel, and if you don't have a nail on the block of wood, it'll just jump off the block of wood. So just have a watch, see what I mean. So now you sort of bring it up to your fingers at about 90 degrees. So now what you have to allow for is, you see how I've gone past 90 degrees. This pipe's going to spring back quite a bit. And I reckon I'm probably not too far off there. So you just push that out to there, have an eyeball. It's kind of parallel to that line there. It doesn't have to be exact. It's just an eyeball measure. Yep, that's actually pretty good. So now I'll show you how you sort of calculate where to do the next bend. Right, let's just have a look at the height that I've ended up with. I was aiming for 1150, and what have I got there? Got about 1200, but that's fine. I'd rather take 50mm off than piss about trying to get 50mm back on there. So just release this. But what I have to consider next is that pencil mark is in line with that inner face there. So my next pencil mark has to be, along that pipe there, has to be the width of the gate that I want minus 2 pipe thicknesses. So I want the gate to be 1000mm wide. So my next pencil mark from this face here along that pipe has to be 1000 minus 42 times 2, so 1000 minus 84. So I'll probably measure that out now, and we'll bend that and we'll see how I go. So if you come along here, 9/16, and use a square so that you're not guessing. So there's about 9/16, about there. I'll put that on the outside. So that's where I need my next bend to be. That mark will end up lined up with the inside face of this. So once again, it's 9/16 plus 2 wall diameters, 2 pipe diameters, gives you the finished width of your gate. One thing you have to make sure you do is you have to make sure these go back in the same position on the pipe bender, otherwise you get a different bend radius and your calculations for where the bend's going to be will be out. So sometimes I put a texture mark there, but I know it's not that easy one there. I know it's the 4th one. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So we'll just tighten that valve up. It's tight. Get that out to my mark, which is so we'll get that out to there. Right, now what I have to look at is that pipe there has fallen down as it's touching the ground. So I'll need that block of wood under there to hold it up, otherwise I'll get a twisted bend. You get a gate with a twist in it, which is a real pain. I've finished bending that second bend, and as you can see from the chalk lines, it's pretty much exactly 90 degrees. There's a little bit of parallax error down there, but it's pretty close to 90. I've bent it past 90 and then let it spring back, because whenever you bend steel, it never stays exactly where you want it to. It always springs back a little bit, so you have to take it past where you want it and allow it to spring back, and that varies with the type of steel, even the batch of steel. It varies by quite a bit, so you really have to have a bit of a practice so that you can get it spot on. What I'm doing now is I'm doing the second bend on this gate, but this piece of pipe isn't going to contact the ground, so to get these two parallel, get these two bends parallel, you just check that that's vertical. which it is, which is surprising. Okay, that's good. And I've pinched in the rollers there so it shouldn't shift. I've just taken a tiny bit of tension on them. I'm going to stand this up like that. Check that's vertical. Right, that's vertical now, so if I don't touch that, and I'll put load on this, make sure my pencil marks in the middle of the mandible, which it is. There, now that shouldn't shift, and I should be able to get these two bends very, very close to being parallel. Just move that so I don't break it. And once you get to about 45 or 135, whichever way you want to look at the angle, there, that shouldn't shift now, so I can lie that down. I'll still put my block of wood under there, and probably under there too, just so it doesn't twist. Now that should end up pretty right. I've bent that second gate. I've bent two of these larger gates, and what I'm going to do now is measure from there to there, and I'm not going to bother to cut this one down to 1150, because if it's like 1200 it really doesn't matter very much at all. So I'm going to measure from there to there, then from there to there, and I'll cut a piece to go in there to make those two uprights on the gate the same length. Then I'll measure between there and cut a piece to go in the bottom there, because you don't measure across there, because if your bends are out, like I said in there previously, if your bends are out, then that distance from there to there is going to vary. So if you measure from there where the curve just finishes to there where the curve just finishes, you get a more accurate distance as to how wide the gate actually is. The other way you could have done this is, I've done basically a gate like that with a short leg and then a long leg, and then I'll add a piece in there to make X equal X. Another way you could have done this was bent a piece like that and then bend a piece like that. So your two curves are opposite, which is fine. That looks quite nice actually. But I didn't have four pieces long enough to do two gates like that. I've got a piece long enough to do that and then add a piece on. And like I said, this will be the hinge side, so that won't matter. That's not the side you look at when you walk up to a gate. You normally look at the latch side. The latch will be here somewhere. Okay, I've worked out why that first piece of pipe, the thin wall pipe that I tried to bend, crimped like that, because it isn't water pipe, it is galv conduit. So that pipe bender is designed to bend water pipe of a certain wall thickness, and yeah, that conduit just couldn't hack it. So that's my excuse. And you know what I always say, excuses are like arseholes, everybody's got one. But yeah, that's why that kinked, I'd say. So there you go. At least I've discovered that, so I won't try and bend any more of that. I can use it to extend this gate because it's the same outside diameter. It just won't bend. I'm at the point now where I've measured the distance from there to there, and I've cut this piece of pipe about 20 mil too long, because what you do is, get the angle right, you bird mouth it. It's actually a woodworking term, I think, bird mouthing. You bird mouth it so it fits like that, so you've got less weld to have to do. And there's the other side. So looks like I got them pretty right first go, which is nice. That's always nice to do. So now I'll take them off and I'll grind the galv away from where I want to weld it. Because MIG welding doesn't like having to burn through galv. Arc welding does. Arc welding doesn't give a shit, but MIG welding is a bit more refined process, and it definitely benefits from having the metal cleaned up before you weld it. I've had to overdub the audio for this part of the video. It was only the crackling sound of me welding anyway, so what happened was I had Spotify running in the background and there was some music playing, and I didn't really want to get done for copyright infringement. But a couple of points here is I'm spotting the welds there. With a MIG welder, you should be able to run a bead of weld. But because I'm welding on the end of a thin piece of tube, you've got to make sure you don't get it too hot so that you don't burn holes in the end of the tube itself. And speaking of galvanized pipe, you have to grind through the galv to get to the steel underneath, because when you weld galv without grinding it away, it gases and bubbles out, and it actually leaves porosity in the weld itself. It looks a bit like an aero bar. So, and the way you can tell that if you got through the galv is galv doesn't make sparks, the steel underneath does. So if you just gently grind until you see some sparks, you know that you're through the galv. You'll get better advice. There are some very good welding channels on YouTube. What I do is I tend to work it out as I go, and this other weld that I do up this end, it's a smaller gap and I can run a better weld. But what you do after this is you let it cool, and then you will just wire brush it. I just use a wire brush on a impact driver, little tech screw gun, and wire brush all the crud off of it, all the scorching and all the powder that comes off the galv, and then just spray it with a bit of cold galv, and I find that that's pretty good. That lasts for ages. And with these gates, I'm either going to run 3/4 inch water pipe along them to match up with the wires on the fence, or I might put mesh on them. Yeah, I'm still to work that out. So this is this is just me welding it, and like I said, this is just because I had some music running in the background. One of the issues you get when making gates is that sometimes the hinges that you get from the rural supply shop or the hardware store don't actually fit. That's the same size diameter pipe that I've made the gates from. So see, that's no good. That'll flog about. It doesn't even run on that bearing face there, which is where the pipe's supposed to run. It doesn't. So that's not hard to overcome though. Let me show you what you do. This piece of pipe fits nicely over there, and you get the added benefit of they run on the face. So it's a little bit uneven, but it's better than it running on that face there, because it'll just wear it away. So that'll be a good bearing face there, and usually when I put a gate up, I'll just put a whack of grease in there, and that's usually good for quite a few years. So what I'm going to do with this piece of pipe is, once again, this is the diameter pipe that I made the gate from. I'm going to weld that in there so it protrudes about 10 mil. That way I can get a weld right around there, and then once again that face will run on the bearing face there that it's supposed to run on. One thing you have to give some consideration to though is that when you weld this piece of pipe into the larger piece of pipe, that you put it on the outside. So this is the hinge side. This will be the side where my thumb is, will be the side towards the post. So that's one thing you have to take consider of. But that's how you sleeve a pipe, a gate, to take a smaller pin. Something else you find when you're working with pipe is this one here. That's a really nice quality piece of pipe. I know you don't normally get excited over water pipe, but there's no seam in that one. And look, it goes on there, and it's almost like it's meant to. This other piece, see that seam? And it won't bloody go in there. So, and no amount of grinding. You don't want to take the galv off of that, and you don't really want to go opening that up because you're just getting rid of all the galv. So I'll show you what you do with that one. What you do is you slot it with a grinder, and then just open it up. Just belt a chisel in there, put it in the vise and belt a chisel in there so it spreads it a bit. Then that goes straight on there, and then as you can see, that's going to pivot beautifully on there. And then you weld this opening against the wall of the gate. So then I would weld that inside that pipe with that at the tight side. I mean, it'll weld all the way around. There's probably only a couple of millimeters in it,
But if you stay consistent with what you're doing, then you get a more consistent result. So you just put that in there, weld that so that it's seated all the way around. Leave a little bit protruding, so that's the bearing face goes against the pin, and that's how you sleeve a gate if it's the wrong size pipe for the hinge pin. There are different ways of bracing gates. So basically you've got your gate shaped like that, and it's hinged here and it catches there, so you don't want it to sag. And there's several ways of doing it. You can do like a Warren truss for a fairly long gate, and some gates are long enough that you end up with a W or an M. I don't know if it makes any difference. You have to look up trusses on the internet or on YouTube to see if it really makes a great deal of difference. And if it's a slightly shorter gate, then you brace it. There's your hinges. You brace it like that, because then that piece of pipe is under tension. Because things can buckle under compression, but not under tension. Under tension, it's only going to get stronger, only going to get straighter, like pulling a piece of wire tight or a piece of string tight. Now, the gates that I'm making, they are 2.23 meters. I'm not going to do any of that because I've got mesh. And when you weld mesh on a gate, and I'll weld at every point, the mesh ends up forming the structure of the gate so that it won't sag or bend out of place. Now the small PA gate is only 960, I think it is. It's not very big at all, so that's not really going to need much bracing at all. But I'm just going to put some mesh on that for just now, because I actually want to make a decorative panel to go in there, but I'm not even sure what I'm doing with that yet, so we'll have to wait and see. So they're the basic ways of making gates. You can make like a Warren truss, just a single cross brace, mesh, or this one doesn't really need bracing because it's so small. That's just what I've found anyway. I'm not an expert, but this is just what I've found works for me. I mentioned before that the gate hinges you buy from the hardware store or the rural supply store have a running face around there for the gate to run on. This is one that I made a few years ago. I pulled it out of the post because we wanted to move the gate anyway. But as you can see, what I've done there is I have cut a small slot of the pipe, a small section of the pipe, and just welded it there and there, so that has then got the similar, it's not perfect, but a same sort of running face on it. Otherwise it's just going to run on that face there and it'll just scallop out. If you can imagine the gate running back and forth, is just going to scallop that out. And it won't make an automatically closing gate because life's never that easy, is it? So that's what you do if you've made your own pins, or if you've got a pin like that. I have actually seen these damaged because they've just been left for too long, and these wear right away. So what I would do there is I would cut a slot a piece of this off, slide it down over the pin, and then weld it so that you've then got a fresh running face. Basically you end up with a little bit of pipe on the outside there. So you've got a nice new running face. Apart from that, I always put these in with a little bit of grease so they screw in easier, but also then you've isolated the galv from the wood, and they do tend to last a lot longer anyway. There's that piece ready for welding, and as you can see I've ground the galv back to the steel on the inside pipe, and I've ground that face around there. So I'm welding steel to steel, shouldn't be any galv involved in this one. So as you can see, that goes in there nice. A little bit of play, you don't want it too precise or it just wears itself away. So I've wire brushed that. There we go. Looks like I bought one. When I made this gate, I bird mouthed the pipe and then welded it around there. I'm going to have a go at doing this. I've pressed that, let's get a different angle. I've pressed that in my press and I'm going to clean the galv off that and weld that tomorrow. So we'll see how that goes. Like I said, I haven't done a lot of this, so this might be quicker and easier anyway. The only trouble you have is getting that flat end there and the other flat end perfectly parallel. So I'll weld that tomorrow and see how that goes, but that'll be the end of this video. So I'll chuck this video up tonight and we'll, yeah, like I said, I'm nobody's expert on making gates. These are just things that I've learnt, just some things that I've taught myself or been shown. And it seems to work pretty well. I don't seem to have too much trouble making gates.
Thanks for watching the video all the way through to the end. I hope you learnt something and that this video has been helpful if you're looking at making gates. Like I said earlier, it's not specifically about llamas, it's more about farm gates in general. Okay, thank you very much, and make sure you click the like, subscribe and the notifications bell, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.